Hi, my name's Rowena. And on the day of my wedding, the one moment that was supposed to belong to me, my parents stood up and gave a speech about my brother's job promotion. They didn't say my name, not once. Turns out, the entire wedding was just a backdrop, a PR stunt to boost his career, impress his CEO, and make me disappear, again. But that wasn't the first time they rewrote my story, just the most public. So I started digging. And what I found, a will they buried, a voice memo they tried to erase, and a family who would rather silence their daughter than share the spotlight. Why does a family need to erase one child just to worship another? I woke up to the sound of light tapping against the window pane. Rain wasn't forecasted, but the clouds hovered, undecided. Fitting, I thought. Charleston weather had a way of reflecting your mood without asking for permission. Today was supposed to be mine. For once. I sat up slowly, the silk robe sliding over my shoulder as I reached for the phone on my nightstand. Dozens of texts, a few from vendors, none from my mother. I didn't expect one, but I checked anyway. Let it go, Rowena, I whispered to myself, setting the phone down. It's just one day. But we both knew that was a lie. The hairdresser arrived first, then the florist, the planner, the photographer. They rotated around me like I was the centerpiece of a showroom, not a woman about to get married. I smiled on cue, nodded when I was supposed to. Not once did anyone ask if I liked the flowers or if the playlist reflected anything that meant something to me. I had been told, kindly but firmly, that everything had been taken care of. I stepped into the gown I hadn't chosen. The neckline was higher than I preferred, the sleeves more conservative than I was comfortable with. But it photographed well. My mother said so. When I arrived at the estate, the afternoon sun had started to peek out, streaking the manicured lawns with golden warmth. The garden was stunning. White roses, tall glass vases, crystal chandeliers under an ivory tent. Breathtaking, if you didn't know it was all built for someone else's vision. Delilah met me near the back entrance of the tent, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "You look beautiful," she said, but her tone was tight. She stepped in closer and lowered her voice. "Your mom's in full PR mode. Watch your back." I gave a small nod, brushing imaginary lint off my skirt. "Thanks for the heads up." The ceremony went smoothly. I walked down the aisle on my father's arm. He smiled, but never looked directly at me. The officiant read his lines with warmth. Julian stood waiting, his grin calm, the kind that said, "We'll get through this." For a moment, I thought, maybe it would be okay. Maybe the 1,000 little slights I'd absorbed over the years were just noise. Maybe today would rewrite the script. But then I saw her, my mother. She wasn't crying. She wasn't looking at me. She was scanning the crowd, checking on the photographer, nodding at someone I didn't recognize. Her lips moved, directing, correcting, controlling. I should have known. The reception kicked off just after golden hour. Guests mingled, glasses clinked, laughter floated like perfume through the air. My brother Lucian stood tall in his navy suit, holding court with a few board members from the family company. I stood near the bar, watching my mother usher someone toward them. "Isn't that Ryan Sheffield?" I turned. Gideon stood next to me, the best man and my old college friend. "Lucien's CEO," he added, his brow furrowed. I didn't answer, just stared. Why was Ryan Sheffield here? Why would my mother invite the man in charge of promoting Lucien? Unless... No. The call for speeches came sooner than I expected. My parents were invited to the stage. My mother beamed as she took the mic. My father stood beside her, smiling like this was the crowning moment of their legacy. I held my breath. This would be it. Maybe I wasn't included in the playlist or the flower arrangements, but this was family. They would talk about me, about us. They didn't. My mother began, "We are beyond proud to celebrate not just a beautiful wedding, but the incredible achievements of our son, Lucian." There was a pause. Some heads tilted, confused. "He's just been promoted to senior VP, and with Ryan here tonight, we couldn't be prouder. This family is built on excellence, on legacy, and tonight, we honor that." They went on. About Lucien, his dedication, his leadership, his natural talent for carrying the Duval name. Not once did they mention me, not once. When the applause came, I didn't hear it. My ears buzzed. My heart slowed. Lucien gave a humble smile, patting Ryan on the back. My husband looked at me with something that resembled guilt, but he didn't move. Gideon didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Delilah touched my hand. I hadn't realized I'd been clutching the edge of the tablecloth. "Breathe," she whispered. I tried. I smiled for the cameras. I tilted my head when someone tried to take a picture. I raised a glass when the toast ended. My champagne stayed untouched. Everything stayed untouched. Flashbacks flickered behind my eyes like old film reels. Birthdays where Lucien blew out my candles because he was just faster. Family trips I wasn't invited to because he needed the bonding time. School awards no one came to because Lucien had a soccer banquet. A lifetime of being the afterthought. And tonight? Tonight was the finale. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't storm out. But when my mother leaned in and whispered, "You should be grateful, Rowena. He's going to run the company someday." Something in me broke. Not loudly, not violently, just cleanly, like the final stitch in a long, painful seam being snipped. I didn't walk out of the reception that moment. I should have, maybe, but I didn't. I stood still, smiling at strangers while my mind retreated somewhere far colder than Charleston's spring breeze. Lucien was being congratulated in all directions. My new husband, Julian, raised his glass at the wrong time, probably trying to look supportive, but missing every beat. I watched him with a strange detachment, like I was looking at an actor in a scene I hadn't auditioned for. The MC made an announcement, inviting everyone to find their seats for dinner. I looked around, scanning for my name among the neatly placed cards on the long banquet tables under the tent. I didn't find it near Julian's, not near my parents either. It wasn't until I reached the far end of the lawn, tucked beside the catering station, that I saw it. My name, printed in small cursive, pressed into a folded card. My place was at a table with my third cousins, the kind I'd only seen once, at a funeral, and who still pronounced my name wrong. Lucien was seated at the center, flanked by our parents and Mr. Sheffield, of course, the Duval Royal Court, and I guess I was lucky to have a seat at all. I sat down quietly. One of my cousins tried to strike up small talk about a local baseball game. I nodded politely, but didn't hear a word. "Mrs. Cross," someone chirped. I turned. A child, no older than 8, beamed at me from the next table. "I like your dress," she said, all sunshine and innocence. I forced a smile. "Thank you. That's kind of you." She returned to her plate. I looked down at the stiff bodice pressing into my ribs. I remembered the dress I picked out 6 months ago. Simple, clean lines, lace back, soft ivory. It made me feel like myself. Like maybe this day could reflect even a sliver of who I really was. But that dress never made it past the second fitting. My mother had intervened. "It's too plain. This is a Duval wedding, Rowena. You represent more than just yourself." So here I was, in the gown she chose, heavy satin, sleeves I hated, a neckline that belonged to someone 30 years older. It wasn't just a dress, it was a declaration. Another reminder that I was an accessory to a brand, not a bride. Delilah appeared like a breath of air, sliding into the empty chair beside me. "I had to sneak past the dessert table to get here," she said. "Your mom nearly tackled me when she saw me walking away from the main tent." "She's busy, running PR, I guess," I muttered. Delilah leaned in. "You okay?" I smiled. That tight, rehearsed smile I'd perfected over a lifetime. "Of course, why wouldn't I be?" She didn't respond immediately, just watched me with those eyes that knew me better than anyone else. "Ro, why didn't you stop her?" she asked, voice low. "Because I thought maybe, just maybe, this time, they'd let it be about me." Delilah exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "That's not a strategy. That's a prayer." We sat there in silence. The servers brought out plates I didn't remember choosing. Toasts were made, but not by me. The cake was rolled out, 5 tiers, covered in white orchids, and my name wasn't on it. Not once did someone ask if I wanted to speak. Not once did anyone offer me the mic. Photographers snapped shots of my parents and Lucian under the monogrammed backdrop that read, Duval Legacy Gala, not Rowena Julian, not even Mr. and Mrs. Cross, just the brand. I walked toward the edge of the tent and found myself standing behind a group being posed for another photo. The photographer turned slightly, then shifted me further out of the frame. Let's keep the family line clean, he said with a polite smile. I walked away before I said something regrettable. The sun had nearly set now, casting long shadows across the lawn. The lights hanging above flickered on, casting everything in a soft glow, like a movie set that didn't know the lead actress had left the building. I ducked into the house and found the powder room down the hall. Locking the door behind me, I leaned against the sink. My hands were trembling. I stared at the woman in the mirror. She looked polished, well-dressed, flawless even, but I didn't recognize her. Who the hell is this wedding for? I asked softly, not expecting an answer. The silence that followed was louder than anything I'd heard all day. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a folded photo. The edges were worn, the corners soft from being handled too many times. It was from high school, graduation day. I stood in my cap and gown in the middle of the football field, smiling, alone. My parents weren't there. Lucian had a job interview in New York that day, and they decided it was more important in the long run. I remembered how they had said, "You understand, right? We're proud of you, but Lucien's future needs nurturing." They'd asked me to take a photo to send them, so I did. And then I didn't speak to either of them for a week. Looking at that picture now, I saw the same smile I wore tonight. Fragile, pretend, taut. The photo blurred as tears welled. I blinked them away. Not now, not yet. There was no room for self-pity here. Not tonight. I carefully folded the photo back into my bag and wiped my face with a paper towel. Then I stood up straighter and unlocked the door. The hallway was empty, quiet, humming with music from the tent. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to sit quietly while they wrote me out of my own story. I stood in that bathroom for longer than I intended, the photo of me in my cap and gown still pulsing behind my eyes even after I tucked it back into my clutch. The music from the reception buzzed in the distance, dull, almost muffled now, but I couldn't bring myself to return. Not yet. Instead, I found a quiet bench just outside the side door of the estate. The sky had shifted to that bruised purple shade that comes just before full nightfall. I pulled the shawl tighter around my arms and let the cool air settle the heat still rising in my chest. The last time I wore white for a ceremony, they didn't show up either. It had been a sunny Saturday in June, the kind of blue sky day where your skin feels warm just by standing still. I remember the smell of fresh-cut grass and cheap perfume from the woman handing out programs. My cap itched. My gown clung to my calves in the heat. I waited at the gate of the football field for my parents. Lucian had an awards ceremony in New York that weekend, a Young Leader of the Year event his company had sponsored. I thought they'd fly back the morning of my graduation. I had even ironed my sash twice, just in case. Instead, I got a text. From my mother. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. Please send photos. Lucian's event ran longer than expected. Hope you understand." Hope you understand. That was her favorite phrase when they failed to show up. I took the photos anyway, smiling, alone. My friend Janelle's dad took them, awkwardly but kindly, telling me to hold my diploma tighter and look proud. I did my best. I stared into the night now, fingers curled tight around the shawl. I hadn't thought about that day in a while. I'd pushed it so far back I almost convinced myself it hadn't mattered, but it had. The disappointment didn't just sting, it planted something. A seed of quiet understanding that would grow into certainty. I was optional. It didn't stop there. When I was offered a place at NYU's writing program the year after, I kept it to myself for 3 days. Just sat with the envelope in my lap, heart thumping like I'd won the lottery and couldn't cash the ticket. Eventually, I told them. Dad looked up from his laptop, nodding slowly. "That's impressive. Really is. But You know your brother's MBA deposit is due this month. Timing's tight. Mom chimed in, as if rehearsed. We can't afford both, sweetie. Lucien's program is more of a long-term investment. Creative writing is, well, you know. I didn't argue. I just nodded, smiled, and said I'd defer. I never applied again. That choice, no, that sacrifice, never got mentioned. Never came up in family dinners or holiday toasts. No one remembered what I gave up, but I did. I remembered every single thing they asked of me that Lucien never had to consider. My phone buzzed in my hand, jarring me out of the memory. A text. From Piper, my cousin. Piper. OMG, I just found something. You need to see this. Sending now. Don't kill me. A second later, a forwarded email popped up. The subject line, Wedding Agenda PR Strategy. I tapped it open. The thread was between my mother, Lucien, and someone from a PR consulting firm. It started 2 months ago. It outlined key talking points for the wedding, photo moments, even guest positioning. And there, in bold, use wedding to subtly promote Lucien's leadership path. Important. Mr. Sheffield sees family unity and legacy strength. Emphasize Duval image. Bride's portion minimal. Keep elegant and emotional, but brief. Minimal, elegant, brief. I scrolled, my pulse thudding. Verina's last line read, This is Lucien's springboard to the board. Let's make it worth it. There was no mention of Julian, barely any of me. The entire plan was a polished spectacle to elevate Lucien. My wedding had been restructured, scripted like a campaign rollout. I wasn't a daughter, I was a backdrop. I didn't feel the tears coming until my throat closed. I stood up and walked, not toward the reception, but away from it, down the side path toward the parking area where fewer people lingered. The estate lights faded behind me, replaced by the chirping of early summer crickets and the quiet of open air. At a small stone wall near the driveway, I sat and opened the Notes app on my phone. New note. Title. If I disappear. First line. Would anyone notice? I stared at the words for a long time. I wasn't thinking anything dramatic. I wasn't planning on vanishing into the woods or leaving a note on a mirror. But the thought wasn't just a whisper. It was a scream I'd swallowed for too many years. If I stopped trying, stopped being the agreeable, well-behaved placeholder, would anyone even realize something had changed? A shuffle of footsteps startled me. I looked up to see Gideon. He didn't say anything right away, just shrugged out of his jacket and placed it over my shoulders without asking. The fabric smelled like cedar and faint coffee. I saw the email too, he finally said. Piper sent it to me. I nodded. I didn't need to explain. He already knew. Always did. We sat in silence for a minute, the kind of silence that doesn't ask for comfort or apology, just acknowledgement. When he finally spoke again, it was barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, Ro. I closed the Notes app and slipped the phone back into my purse. I'm not crazy, am I? I asked, voice small. He turned to me, eyes steady. No, you're just finally seeing it all for what it is. I didn't cry, but my hands stopped shaking. And just like that, I remembered. I wasn't crazy. They really did erase me. Gideon's jacket was still warm when I stood up from the stone wall and handed it back. He didn't try to talk me out of going back inside. He didn't offer pity. That's why I trusted him. He let the weight sit there between us without needing to rearrange it. By the time I re-entered the estate, the music had shifted. Slower, smoother now. The kind of playlist meant to signal the start of dancing, of winding down. Guests had gathered near the dance floor, sipping cocktails and gently swaying under the low amber lights. But I didn't head there. Instead, I walked past the double doors at the end of the hall and slipped into the library. The space was dim, lit only by a few brass lamps and the fireplace flickering in the corner. Shelves lined the walls, mostly decorative coffee table books and dust-free hardcovers that looked untouched. It was the one place in this estate that hadn't been staged within an inch of its life. I needed to breathe. Alone. A minute later, Gideon joined me. He handed me his phone, the screen already queued up. A simple voice memo. The label read, Wedding Rehearsal, Thursday evening. You said you wanted the truth, he murmured. I tapped play. It started harmlessly enough. Murmurs, chairs shuffling, my dad joking awkwardly with the planner. Then came my parents' voices, practicing their joint speech. We're so proud of our daughter Rowena, my mother said in that poised tone she always used in public. She's always carried grace, kindness, and determination, and we're thrilled to welcome Julian to our family. My dad added, she's the kind of woman who makes everyone around her better, especially me. I learned how to listen because of her. I stared at the phone, trying to reconcile what I was hearing with what I'd heard during the actual reception. That version, live and public, had been sterilized, cold, empty, a PR memo disguised as a toast. But this rehearsal, it was warm, personal. It felt real. They had it, I whispered. They wrote it, they said it, and then they changed it. Gideon nodded. I think you know why. I did. They had meant to give me something real, something decent. But somewhere between that rehearsal and the live event, they rewrote the narrative because Lucien's promotion needed centering, because their image mattered more than mine, because I was, yet again, an asterisk in my own story. I stood there, breathing through the hurt as it settled deeper into my ribs. That was when I heard the click of heels on tile. I turned. Verena. Sweetheart, she said smoothly. You've been missing all evening. People are asking. I didn't respond. She stepped closer, brushing imaginary lint off her sleeve. Are you sulking? I blinked once, slowly. You rewrote my wedding day. Her brow lifted, not in surprise, but in amusement. Rowena, don't be theatrical. You're a grown woman now. This day isn't about speeches. It's about new beginnings. You had the words, I said evenly. You said them, you meant them, until you didn't. She shrugged. We had to make adjustments. Lucien's future is pivotal to this family. You'll have your own life now, your own name. What matters is what lasts. I felt the temperature shift in the room, not the air, but inside me. Something dropped out of place, or maybe into place. Hard to say. You're just a girl, Rowena, she added, tone sharpening like a scalpel. And girls change their names. That's what we do. That last sentence wasn't even cruel. It was indifferent, like a fact she'd carried since her own youth. Like a family heirloom of dismissal passed from one generation to the next. I didn't flinch. I nodded once. Not to escape a name, but to build one you can't erase. For the first time all night, her face faltered. She stared at me for a beat too long before smiling tightly and turning toward the door. Try not to make a scene, she said as she walked out. There are still photographers around. And just like that, she left the room. Gideon didn't speak. He knew better. I sat down in the leather armchair nearest the fireplace, staring into the orange glow. I could still feel the echo of her words around me. I was just a girl. I would change my name. Lucian was the legacy. Delilah appeared in the doorway, looking hesitant. You okay? I looked up at her. Something in my expression must have said it all. What did she say? She asked. I exhaled slowly. Enough. I took out my phone. Opened my files. I saved everything. The email thread Piper sent me. The rehearsal recording from Gideon. A side-by-side note comparing the original speech with the public one. Then I opened a fresh folder in my cloud drive. I titled it, Invisible Ink, My Side of the Story. I stared at the screen for a moment, watching the upload bar crawl. I wasn't ready to speak yet, but I knew this much. Some people tell their stories, others record the proof first. I stepped back into the tent just as the lights shifted. The golden hues had dimmed to a soft twilight blue, the kind that makes everything look dreamier than it feels. Guests were beginning to settle at their assigned tables again, gearing up for dessert and final speeches. From the outside, it looked like a perfect Southern wedding evening. But inside me, something had cracked open, and not the fragile kind. This was deeper, permanent. As I moved toward my seat, still tucked away at the edge of the tent, I passed Lucian laughing with Mr. Sheffield, holding court like a groom himself. My mother caught my eye from across the room and offered a tight smile, that perfectly curated expression of warmth she wore for fundraisers and news cameras. It didn't reach her eyes. I sat down, folded my napkin, and tried to breathe like my ribs weren't closing in on themselves. That's when it came back to me, like a stone dropped into still water. 1 week before the wedding, my mother had asked me to come by the house to sign a few quick documents. The wedding planner would be there, she said, just some paperwork to make things flow smoothly on the big day. I didn't question it. I never really did. Verena had a way of making everything sound like it was for your benefit, even when it wasn't. When I arrived, she and a man in a gray suit were already waiting in the sunroom. The man stood as I entered. "I'm Alan, the family's legal consultant," he said, extending a hand. "Consultant?" I'd asked. "Just to make sure everything's buttoned up. Ceremony, contracts, logistics, nothing to worry about." They slid the folder toward me. I flipped through it quickly. The pages were packed with legalese. A couple of clauses about estate protection, some wedding vendor agreements, and one that had been highlighted. Premarital financial agreement. Verena's voice was calm. "It's just procedural. Lucian signed something similar when he got promoted. All of this protects everyone. It's standard." I hesitated. "I thought we weren't doing a prenup." Her eyes softened. "We weren't. But with the foundation and the family name tied to everything, it's just safer. You understand, right?" I nodded, stupidly. "Yeah, sure, I guess." And then I signed it. Back in the present, I picked up my phone from the table and texted Delilah. "Me. Did I ever show you the documents Mom had me sign last week?" Delilah. "What documents?" Me. "The wedding logistics folder." Delilah. "Wait, are you kidding? That wasn't a logistics folder. That was an asset shield." My blood ran cold. Delilah appeared at my side 5 minutes later, cheeks flushed like she'd run the whole way from the other end of the property. "You didn't seriously sign that," she said in a low voice. I did. Her eyes widened. "Ro, that wasn't a regular prenup. That was designed to make sure you had no legal claim to any of the family's property or financial assets once you got married. They boxed you out." I felt dizzy. "They said it was just ceremony stuff." "They lied," she snapped, then softened when she saw my face. "I'm sorry, but you need to know what they're doing." "I already know," I whispered. I glanced across the tent, where my father was speaking to one of the foundation's donors, his drink in hand. I excused myself and walked over slowly, waiting for the conversation to end. "Dad?" I said quietly. He turned, smile fading slightly. "Sweetheart, you okay?" I signed something I didn't understand. A legal document. "Did you know what was in it?" He looked away. "Your mother handled that. She said it was best." "Best for who?" His jaw tightened. "Look, honey, it's just to prevent confusion. We don't want messy entanglements down the road. You'll understand one day." "I already do." He didn't respond. Back in the bridal suite, Delilah helped me out of my heels. The room was quiet now, the hum of the reception reduced to distant music and clinking glass. "Are you sure this is even your wedding?" she asked, almost joking, almost not. I looked at myself in the mirror. The dress I didn't choose, the hair I didn't want, the name that would now follow me even as I had no control over the story being told about it. "No," I said, "but I know who it belongs to." Delilah met my gaze. "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer her right away. Instead, I reached for my phone again. I opened the folder titled Invisible Ink, My Side of the Story. I started dragging more files into it, screenshots, voice memos, emails, including the document I'd signed. I added a title to one of the audio clips, Speech Comparison Duval.mp3. Then I opened a message to Gideon. Me. "If I send you something, will you keep it safe?" His reply came instantly. Gideon. "Always." I hit send. It wasn't loud. And it wasn't angry, but it was a beginning. Later that night, back at my table, I pulled out my phone one more time and opened my Notes app. I created a new draft. No recipients, no send button. Just truth. Draft. If you push again, I will push back, publicly. I know more than you think. I have the rehearsal tape, the email threads, the legal forms. If you keep trying to rewrite me, I will become impossible to erase. I stared at the words, then saved it. They mistook my silence for submission. That was their final mistake. The string lights above the tent shimmered softly as if nothing was wrong. The music had shifted into something jazzy and slow, and the crowd began to scatter into polite groups, laughing, sipping champagne, pretending this night was about love. I lingered just outside the bridal suite, the corridor quiet except for the gentle hum of conversation. My heels clicked once on the floor, then I stopped, frozen by the low sound of voices coming from the small corridor near the catering entrance. I'm telling you, it's fine. Julian's voice. I didn't move. She's just emotional. All this pressure, her big day, she'll calm down by morning. Then came Verina's reply, as polished as always. I hope so. This night's too important for the family to be derailed by one outburst. One outburst. One outburst. That was how they defined all of it. The erasure, the manipulation, the theft of a day that was supposed to mark the beginning of something new for me, not just another chapter in Lucian's career portfolio. I stepped into the light. Julian startled when he saw me. Rowena, I didn't know you were... How long have you known? I didn't yell. I didn't shake. I just asked. He blinked. About what? I tilted my head slightly. The speeches, the guest list, the prenup, the whole game you let them run. He hesitated. I didn't want to upset you. Your mom said it was just to keep things smooth. My mother was already walking away. Of course she was. No interest in confrontation unless it was in a boardroom or behind a podium. Julian reached for me, like that could fix it. I didn't think it would matter that much. I figured once we were married. You figured wrong. I stepped back. Rowena, please, this is your big day. I laughed. Just once, sharp and short. No, Julian, this isn't my day. It never was. It's theirs. It always has been. He looked stunned, but not guilty. Not really. Just inconvenienced. There was nothing else to say. I turned around and walked back into the bridal suite, the dress still stiff around my waist. Inside, I peeled off the gown with quick mechanical movements. My hands didn't tremble. I wasn't sad. I was done. I slipped into the clothes I'd brought for the honeymoon send-off. Dark jeans, a soft hoodie, sneakers I could walk in. My hair was still pinned up, but I didn't care. I tossed my wedding shoes into the trash bin next to the vanity and picked up my clutch. As I stepped out, I didn't sneak. I didn't whisper. I walked right through the tent where guests were now lining up for cake. Some turned. I saw heads tilt, whispers spread. My father raised an eyebrow. Lucian looked like he wanted to intervene, but didn't know how. I didn't slow down. Outside, the air was cooler now. The scent of roses, champagne, and heat lamps clung to the breeze. A set of headlights swung around the corner just as I reached the gravel path near the valet station. Delilah's car. She pulled up and rolled down the window, eyes searching mine for confirmation. I opened the door and climbed in without a word. Ro? Julian's voice behind me. I turned. He had jogged halfway toward the car, stopping short when he realized I wasn't going to make a scene. Where are you going? He asked, hands out. Anywhere but here. He stepped closer. We have guests. We're supposed to cut the cake. I held his gaze. Let the cake rot. Delilah didn't wait for permission. She shifted into drive and pulled away. We didn't speak for several minutes. The streetlights blurred by. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was oxygen. At her apartment, she handed me a pair of pajamas, a makeup remover wipe, and a large bottle of water before disappearing into her bedroom to give me space. In the bathroom, I stood in front of the mirror and removed the last traces of the woman they had painted me into. The foundation, the blush, the fake lashes. One by one, they vanished. Underneath it all, there I was. Not angry, not broken, just free. Later, sitting cross-legged on Delilah's couch in one of her oversized t-shirts, I opened my laptop and stared at the folder on my desktop. Invisible Ink, my side of the story. I clicked into it. The rehearsal audio, The email threads, the legal forms. I dragged them all into an encrypted drive and hit upload. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about keeping a record that I had existed, that I had seen what they did, that I wasn't going to forget. A digital version of the journal I never kept, but one I could point to when they tried to retell the story, as they always did, with me edited out. I checked the clock. 12:37 a.m. Somewhere, the DJ was probably playing At Last. My parents were likely spinning tales about how I was just tired, just sensitive, just a little overwhelmed. Lucian would be holding court. Julian, well, I didn't care where Julian was. I closed the laptop, pulled the blanket up around my knees, and exhaled. If they thought I'd just vanish into marriage, they forgot who raised me. By the time morning light filtered through the blinds of Delilah's apartment, I'd already been awake for over an hour. I hadn't slept. Not really. A few moments of dozing, eyes closed, but thoughts sprinting, replaying scenes, rewriting conversations in my head that should have gone differently. I sat at her kitchen table with a mug of lukewarm coffee, hair tied up messily, Julian's ring still sitting in the small ceramic dish next to my laptop. I hadn't touched it since I slipped it off. Delilah moved quietly around the apartment, giving me space, but close enough to step in if I suddenly folded. I didn't. Instead, I grabbed my bag and headed straight for Gideon's office downtown. It was just after 8 when I walked through the glass door of the converted townhouse. His assistant hadn't even gotten her second sip of coffee yet. "I'll let him know you're here," she said. "No need," Gideon called from behind her. "She's always welcome." He looked up from his desk and gestured for me to come in. No small talk, no warming up. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded. "Let's see it." He handed me a thick manila envelope. Inside was a printout of a scanned legal document, my grandfather Silas's will, dated 5 years before he died. I recognized the signature, the seal, the handwriting. But it wasn't the contents that made me sit down. It was the name, Rowena LeClaire, sole heir. I reread the paragraph 3 times, making sure I wasn't missing anything. It was all there, not just the estate, the foundation, the publishing rights to his memoir, his shares in the family business, everything. Lucian wasn't even mentioned? I asked quietly. Gideon shook his head. Nope, not once. Silas was specific. He wanted it all left to you when you turned 30. That was last year. So they've known all this time and ignored it, he said. Or they buried it. I looked down at the document again. A memory surfaced like a rising tide. I was 11, sitting cross-legged on the rug in Grandpa Silas's study. He was sipping black tea, glasses perched low on his nose as he read over a manuscript. I asked him why he never let anyone edit his writing before publishing. Because the story changes when the wrong hands hold the pen, he said. Then he looked at me and added, one day, you'll write your own story, and you'll own the rights to it. I hadn't thought about that moment in decades, but now it sat at the center of my chest, radiating. I returned to Delilah's apartment with copies of everything. We barely spoke as I changed clothes. Nothing fancy, just a crisp blouse and dark pants. Respectable, neutral, ready for war kind of attire. Then I drove back to the estate. The meeting had already started. Of course it had. I wasn't invited, but I didn't knock when I walked into the family room where Verena, Warren, Lucienne, and 2 board members sat. They were mid-discussion, glasses of iced tea already sweating on the table. My mother didn't even flinch. "Rowena," she said coolly, "we didn't expect you. That much is clear." Lucienne stood up. "Look, now's not the time." "It is," I said, cutting him off. A chime from my phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from a cousin I hadn't seen in years. "Why is your mom telling everyone you had a breakdown?" My blood warmed. I turned back to Verena. "You told the family I'm unstable?" She didn't blink. "People ask questions when you disappear from your own wedding night." I stepped closer, gripping the envelope tightly in my hand. "You think you can keep changing the story," I said. "But I brought the original script." I slapped the will onto the glass coffee table. The sound echoed in the quiet room. Verena's face twitched for the first time. Warren looked away. "What is this?" Lucian asked. "Grandpa's will," I said. "The real one, the one that names me, not you, not the foundation, me." My mother reached for the document, skimming quickly, her lips pursed. "This was outdated," she said flatly. "He changed it." "No, you did," I replied. And then I heard it. Her voice, drifting from the adjacent hallway. Someone had opened the sliding door to the sunroom. "She only got married to have someone to lean on," Verena said casually to one of the guests. "You know, Rowena, soft-spoken. She was never meant to lead anything." I walked toward the doorway. "I didn't get married to be supported," I said firmly. "I got married because I thought I had a family." Every head in the room turned. Verena rose to her feet. "You're being theatrical again." "No, I'm being factual." I stepped back into the center of the room, picked up the will, and held it up. "You rewrote history," I said, "but I kept the receipts." For a moment, there was only the sound of the ceiling fan spinning overhead. Then Verena crossed her arms. "Do you have any idea what it costs to protect this family?" "Apparently," I said. "Your daughter." Her jaw clenched. Warren didn't move. Lucian shifted on his feet, eyes bouncing between all of us, like he was just now realizing the floor beneath him wasn't steady. I tucked the will back into my folder and turned to leave. The room behind me buzzed with tension, voices rising in attempted explanations or backpedaling. But I didn't need to hear it. The Duval name used to mean something. Now, it means war. It had rained earlier that day, the kind of quick, warm Charleston shower that left the brick sidewalks slick and the air smelling faintly of hydrangeas and moss. By the time I arrived at the theater, the sky had cleared, leaving the kind of soft golden light that photographers crave and event planners obsess over. I stood outside the Duval Foundation Gala in a simple black jumpsuit, no jewelry, no makeup other than a single coat of mascara and tinted lip balm. The kind of outfit that made me feel like myself again, unbranded, unclaimed. Delilah waited in the car, parked a block away. She'd offered to walk in with me, but we both knew this was a moment I needed to step into alone. Gideon had already gone ahead to secure his seat, and to be honest, I wanted to feel my feet hitting the marble floor of that place without anyone else beside me, to hear the echo of my steps and know it was mine. Inside, the theater was buzzing. Soft classical music played as people moved in and out of their assigned rows, glasses of champagne in hand. The stage had been transformed into a showcase of Duval excellence, massive portraits of Lucienne with school children, ribbon cuttings, press clippings from the family's ventures. I saw my mother first. Verena was greeting donors, her smile like porcelain, flawless, cold, unshatterable. Lucienne stood by the curtain, adjusting the mic on his lapel, nodding to someone backstage. He looked confident, polished, as if the events of the past week had never happened. As if I had never happened. I took my seat 4 rows back, center aisle. Gideon sat to my left, his hand resting casually on a small black speaker tucked beneath his coat. "Showtime?" he whispered. "Almost." The lights dimmed slightly. Verena walked onto the stage to polite applause, standing at the podium like a senator preparing for re-election. "We gather tonight," she began, "to celebrate not only our legacy of service, but our commitment to the future. A future led by vision, unity, and strength of character." She turned slightly. "And no one represents that future more clearly than my son, Lucien Duval." The audience clapped, nodding, murmuring their approval. Cameras clicked. Lucien stepped into the light, waving slightly. He thanked the room, offered the usual platitudes about leadership, community, and continuing his grandfather's work. And then, "Legacy," he said. "That's a word we don't take lightly in the Duval family." I stood. At first, no one noticed. But when I stepped into the center aisle and moved toward the stage, whispers rippled across the room like water across glass. Lucien paused, visibly startled. "Excuse me," I said, my voice calm, clear. "Lucien, I'd like to say a few words about legacy." Verena stood immediately. "Rowena, This isn't the time or place. I looked at her. Actually, it's exactly the right time. I climbed the steps slowly, heels clicking against the hardwood. I took the podium. My brother stepped back, unsure, blinking. "Good evening," I said, letting my voice carry to the back rows. "For those of you who don't know me, and I imagine that includes many of you by design, I'm Rowena LeClaire Duval. I was married last week. You might have heard about it, briefly, though if you attended, you might have thought it was a launch party for Lucien's career." Soft laughter from the back. A few gasps. One woman shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I'm not here to cause a scene. I'm here to correct a narrative." I pulled out my phone. "This," I said, tapping play on the speaker Gideon handed me, "is what my parents originally wrote for my wedding rehearsal." The audience listened as Verena's voice filled the room. Kind, affectionate, personal. "We're so proud of our daughter Rowena. She brings light and clarity wherever she goes." I paused the clip. "And this," I continued, "is what they chose to say on the actual day." I recited it from memory. "We are proud to celebrate not just a wedding, but Lucien's recent promotion. The legacy continues." Murmurs again. Eyes darted from the stage to Verena, whose face remained motionless, her hands folded tightly on her lap. "Here's the thing about legacies," I said. "They're not supposed to be built on silence, or obedience, or erasure." I opened a folder, holding up the printed copy of my grandfather's original will. "This document names me, as the rightful heir to the Duval Foundation and estate, not Lucien, not some restructured board. Me." A hush fell. "You built an empire on loyalty," I said, locking eyes with my mother. "But only for those who obey, for those who fall in line. And when I didn't, you tried to write me out. Again." Verena rose from her seat. "This is enough." Gideon, already standing, clicked another button on the speaker. Verena's voice filled the room again, recorded from that hallway just days ago. "She's just a girl. She only got married to have someone to lean on." Several guests shifted. Some stood. One board member looked down, face pale. "Tonight," I said into the mic, "I'm not leaning on anyone." I stepped away. Lucien was frozen. Verena's expression had cracked. I walked past the front row, through the center aisle. This time, no one stopped me. No one even moved. Outside, Delilah waited with the car running. She opened the passenger door as I approached. "You okay?" she asked. I slid into the seat, letting the silence of the city night surround me. "No," I said, "but I'm free." I didn't burn the house down. I just turned on the lights. The day after the gala, my name trended in a way I hadn't anticipated. Not for scandal, not for drama, but for clarity. "Rowena Duval reclaims her legacy," one article read. Another headline simply said, "Mic drop of the year." But I wasn't interested in headlines. I didn't want to read what people said about me anymore. That's how this all started, living in a world where others got to narrate my story before I could even hold the pen. 2 months passed. The Duval Foundation froze operations within a week of my speech. An internal review was initiated, led by external counsel. I stayed out of it. I had no interest in cleaning a house I was never allowed to own. Verena announced her early retirement through a carefully worded statement that mentioned wellness and transitions. Lucien stepped down voluntarily, citing a need for private reflection. No charges were filed, no lawsuits were needed. But the reputational damage hit harder than any courtroom ruling ever could. Donors pulled support, partners distanced themselves, and for the first time in decades, the Duval name stopped being a currency people wanted to trade in. I moved back into my own name, not legally, but in essence. Rowena LeClaire, the woman Silas raised to think critically, to question praise that came with strings, to tell the truth even when no one else clapped for it. One rainy afternoon, while cleaning out some boxes I had stored at Delilah's cafe, I found an old VHS tape labeled in my grandfather's shaky handwriting. Row, 1989, Farm. I borrowed an old player from the thrift shop down the street, set it up on the counter, and inserted the tape. The screen flickered. There he was. Silas LeClaire, sitting on a wooden rocker, holding a baby girl in his arms, me. He was humming, almost off-key, swaying gently as the camera zoomed in. I was laughing, toothless and loud. Then, he looked straight into the lens. She's got her mother's eyes. But she'll rewrite what we couldn't. I froze. It wasn't a prediction. It was a decision, a passing of the baton. And somehow, even though he was gone, it felt like he was right there. Holding the pen out to me, I didn't cry. I smiled, quiet, grateful, full of the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. The next morning I made the final call. I wouldn't sue. I wouldn't fight for control over the Duvall legacy. Instead, I would build something from scratch, using what was already mine. I met with Gideon, signed over my inheritance, and deposited it into a new account registered under the LeClaire Foundation, a nonprofit in my grandfather's name. And in mine. A few weeks later, I stood in front of a crowd at the Charleston Community Center. A small press conference, nothing flashy, just enough media to get the word out. I wore a navy dress, hair down, no makeup, the way I felt most human. I cleared my throat and began. Some of us grow up feeling seen. Others grow up learning to disappear in plain sight. I was the latter. The room was silent. I could feel every breath. But I had someone, my grandfather, who told me I didn't have to stay invisible. That I could write the truth, even if the world preferred fiction. Today, I'm announcing the launch of the Unseen Daughter Scholarship, a fund dedicated to women who've been erased by their families, silenced by expectation, or reshaped to fit someone else's frame. I paused. This isn't revenge, it's redirection. That line hit harder than I expected. People nodded. Some wiped their eyes. Delilah was in the back, phone in hand, recording. Gideon stood near the side, arms crossed, the smallest smile on his lips. Afterward, people approached me, journalists, donors, strangers, but I stayed grounded, polite, concise. I wasn't selling anything. I was just telling the truth. 2 nights later, I received a handwritten letter in the mail from Julian. He apologized, said he had frozen under the weight of my family's shadow. He wished he'd been braver. He hoped I was doing well. I didn't reply. 3 days later, a separate envelope arrived. Warren, my father. No long explanations, just a letter. 1 page, slanted writing, more emotion than polish. I should have stood up for you. I didn't. I won't ask for forgiveness, just a second chance to listen if you ever feel like talking. I read it once. Then I walked outside and burned it in a tin dish on Delilah's back porch. The flame curled each word into ash. Some truths are better left unpreserved. On a quiet Sunday morning, I drove out to the old LeClaire farmhouse. The sky was a powdery gray, the wind just strong enough to make the magnolia leaves rustle like paper. I walked around back, where Silas used to plant tomatoes. Delilah and Gideon met me there, along with 4 young women from the first scholarship class. We each held a small plant in our hands. Mine was a white magnolia. I knelt down, dug the soil, and gently placed the roots inside, packed it with care, watered it. Then I stood. The wind picked up slightly. The scent of soil and spring filled the air. You were wrong, Mom, I whispered. I didn't change my name. I made it matter. Sometimes healing doesn't come from getting an apology. It comes from finally telling your side of the story out loud. Rowena didn't fight for revenge. She chose clarity, and in doing so, she reminded us that you don't have to stay quiet just because someone else is louder. Have you ever felt erased by your own family? What would you have done in her place? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life stories just like this one.